Welcome, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Shah. This is the Data Entrepreneurs. We're a community for entrepreneurs pursuing ventures around AI and other data-focused technologies. Super excited about today's talk because Nicolay is going to be talking about how AI makes money. And he's very qualified to talk about this because he's been helping companies make money with AI for the past few years as the managing director of AISBACH, which I'm probably pronouncing incorrectly. Recently, he launched a podcast called How AI is Built, and he's constantly exploring startup ideas, stress testing them, and seeing what sticks. So super excited about today's workshop. And with that, I'll just hand it over to you, Nicolay.
So I think you already noticed I like descriptive names. Yeah, so I've worked as a freelancer. Now I have a consultancy, AISBACH. Like Shaw already mentioned, we are also building a venture studio right now, and I also have a startup and had a startup before. So this is basically more lessons of the failures I made, or the failures I already had. Yeah, so let's get started. Basically, what we are talking about is how AI makes money. I kept it very open because I think every one of you has a different context and is working on different stuff. So we will be looking into products, models, and also consulting. But first of all, I think what's most important is actually like finding projects and prioritizing the right ones. And in AI especially, it's not just about the algorithms, data, and compute, but it's much more a people problem. And before you monetize, you often have to sell the idea first, whether you're an internal data scientist, data engineer, whether you're coming in from external, or whether you're building a startup. And I would even say, like, before you even start a startup, you should first try to sell the idea before you even get going. And for that, you basically have to first identify the right use case, which I call like highly critical, but least complex. You have to identify how it has to be integrated into existing processes. And that's basically into existing workflows by humans. Or if you're completely automating something, how it fits into the existing infrastructure and the tech stack of the company. And you're always replacing something. And nowadays, what I often see, the companies that are actually accepted best aren't the ones who are positioning themselves as like the new thing, but they are rather saying like we are like the version of X, like for example of Redshift, but faster, better, more reliable, stuff like that. And then you have to identify a champion. So basically in your client, who can you help push the project or promote the product? And then you have to identify who you are selling to. And this often is C-level, CTO, because in data and AI, doing bottom-up sales still is a little bit challenging. And this is already like pitch it as X, but faster or better. What I already mentioned, like the critical but least complex, this is basically about impact and effort. And what you're always trying to hit is basically high impact and low effort. This is basically your quick win. And this is especially something you're driving value, you're doing it in the least amount of time possible, which makes the adoption way easier. And ROI is something that's thrown around very often in the data and AI space, but it's impossible to calculate. You often have rather cost savings on your end, which you're driving, but doing exact estimations of that isn't really possible. We are mostly, at the moment at least, looking at a lot of generative AI use cases where you estimate like how much time are humans at the moment spending on that task and how much can you shave away from that. And this gives you like a little bit of an estimation of how much impact you can have on the bottom line. And trying to drive revenue is still very challenging. Especially because you can't really attribute, like, is AI the driver of the revenue or anything else? You will never know. So I would always go like, assess how much cost you're saving. That's the easiest path. Then assess the technical feasibility. And then look for the low complexity things. So basically, if you have the choice between multiple different projects, go with the one which is the least complex and which often can be integrated fairly quickly and which can be implemented very quickly. And this means not just complexity overall for like a full scale, but also for the POC. If you can churn out a POC in like a few days and this already shows value, you can even go for like the more complex solution. But rather the initial value you're showing should be in the least amount of time and the least amount of complexity possible. And this also means like looking where you have to do the least amount of integrations as well. So what is high impact? I will fly through that. We can talk about that later. So basically you're addressing pressing business needs that impact the bottom line of operations. So basically, does the company have an area with losing market share or where new competitors are coming in? Can the project improve operational efficiency? Can the project stop the company from losing money, like customer churn satisfaction? Can the project increase productivity? And there I'm always going for like either high wage jobs, so basically professionals, data scientists, data engineers, which are really expensive, or high frequency tasks, which are basically the e-commerce tasks, which are done so often, though that they are robbing like a really large amount of time. And this is like a good quote by Alex Hormozi: if you want to sell hot dogs, find hungry people. So basically you have to find people which really need your solution. What is low effort? Low effort or low complexity projects are first, they're leveraging existing data and infrastructure. So you don't really need significant investment in data collection or infrastructure setup. They have minimal changes to the existing business processes. They just basically take over a task and do not completely change the task, so they have to learn new behaviors. They require the existing technical expertise, and this is especially if you're internal to a company. Basically, do you actually have the talent in-house to do the project? And if you're doing consulting projects and you're implementing something and you're handing it over to the company, this is also something you have to consider, because you're handing it over to them and they have to maintain it. So do they actually have the technical expertise to still maintain and deploy the fancy stuff you're developing, and also have a clear and well-defined scope? And this is something you will never get around. And now let's go into the part we actually came here for, which is the monetization. I think there are three main methods. On the one hand, you sell products, which is still mostly SaaS-based. On the second one, which is newer, which I see at the moment done more and more, which is sell models. And the last one is basically sell advice, which is the consulting. And in that, I count basically advising on AI projects or doing the implementation. And through that, you're always driving some kind of value. And these are either cost reductions or increased revenue, whereas most AI projects will fall in the first category. And now let's look at it how we have done it before, and I think some rough guides of how you can do it as well. For monetizing products, I'm a big fan of validate first and then build second. So I always like to start out in really a niche of a niche and like to find specific problems. And for that, I like to build tools, especially for professions. This is a nice way to go about it. A profession you know really well, look at them. What problems do they have? Where do they spend an enormous amount of time? And look whether you can actually take away some of that. And these are like three different markers of a good problem. There isn't an existing solution. Customers are trying to build workarounds, and in the best case, they're failing, and they spend a large amount of time there. And then you can start to go out and actually talk to a few customers. So you try to find a few people who are interested enough to be put on a wait list and be notified about the project. And in here, the highest fidelity version of the product is a pitch deck and nothing else. And on the last version, if you cannot close the sales, like the third step, you should basically just jump to the next thing you can actually explore, like find the next problem. So you have to validate the solution with sales. So if you cannot close anyone, they aren't likely to be interested. And here you can do like a scaled down prototype, like with Streamlit, or what we're doing for data products. We are just creating Excel lists and trying to sell them. But do not really overdo it in here. If you cannot sell it with something really minimal, you probably cannot sell it once it's larger, and you should just basically save the time and the effort. Monetizing models, just in advance, I don't really like this model. I think it's really challenging, and especially because of the first one. You need proprietary data assets nowadays to actually deliver something meaningful. Otherwise, most companies will prefer to develop it in-house because they like to keep their IP. And there's also no easy way to really sell licenses. And over time, the company will have your input and output data because they will be feeding it in and they will be using your output. So you will lose the data advantage over time. And monetizing advice. So this is my main area, what we're doing at AISBACH and what I did as a freelancer. So basically you're building solution or you're helping build them. So I did both strategic consulting, which is mostly like tech lead for hire, where you help internal teams to adopt and use AI. And you also help the C-suite find and prioritize the problems. And if you're doing the implementation as well, you implement it. A few examples which we've done before, which you can already see, like it's mostly reducing cost. And you should always know in advance, like what is the project actually targeting? Is it going to the top line or the bottom line? And there are a few examples, like we did AI-driven CRM plugins, and this was mostly like replacing human labors. The second one, automobile production time forecasting, which was also like reducing customer churn and customer dissatisfaction because the production forecasting was really bad. And also the last one, which was government spending market data analytics, which we did for another company. How can you set yourself apart? Which is probably the most challenging thing in consulting, especially because there are so many different solutions providers who are doing implementation, so many people, especially nowadays, who are doing Gen AI consulting. And you really have to think about how do you position yourself to actually get customer and get known for something. And there again, it is really the narrower you position yourself, the more niche you go, the more specific the message is, the easier it is to actually get customers in that area. And you really try to be like really different from the rest of them and not just incrementally better, because there are so many different AI consultancies or implementation agencies. And if you do not really set yourself apart from them, they will always go with the default option, which will be stuff like Deloitte, EY, or Accenture. So you can do that by basically focus on an industry. So you dive deep into a specific vertical like healthcare and become the go-to expert for AI solutions within that space. You can focus on technologies. Like one guy, for example, Jason Lee on Twitter, is focusing fully on RAG and helping companies basically get everything they can out of RAG. And he's demonstrating that he mastered it. He's like all over Twitter all the time and getting customers through that. What we like to do as well is like we are using demo-driven sales, which is if you already have a following on social media, you probably don't need that. If you don't, you need to basically get into the inboxes of your potential customers and already demonstrate value. And we like to do that through demo-driven sales. So we are building quick and dirty prototypes for specific verticals, like for example, finance, or even more specific, like private equity firms. And we are sending it to them with a message, and we have like at least quadrupled our open rates. And at the same time, this is our main source of new clients. Then two more differentiations, which I am exploring right now, which I really want to try, which is outcome-based pricing and subscription-based services. The last one, subscription-based services, is more and more common, especially in design and web development, where agencies are offering basically a subscription, which I don't think it's viable for web development and design because it's more a one and done. In AI and data, I think this is much more viable that you actually build a subscription for implementation and also the maintenance of the AI project over time, which solves one of the issues I mentioned before, that you have to hand it over to the data teams. If you provide a subscription where you say like within 24 hours, potential issues will be resolved or will be handled by one of our teams, this could be an interesting offer to set yourself apart. The outcome-based pricing is something I like to offer when a client doesn't want to pay our prices. When I'm really sure about our solutions, I try to get a cut out of the cost savings or potential revenue we are driving. And I often offer that, and they're basically just declining it and going with the initial offer. Maybe even a little sales trick. And yeah, so basically niche down sooner than later. We noticed that pretty early. We started out very general. Now we have like a few specific areas we're going in where we already have our case studies or where we already worked in previously. And also try to align your outcomes with your customers. I see a lot of agencies which have like really bad pricing, basically for POCs going to like 50, 60K. And I think like a POC isn't worth something like that. You should really try to drive value, and when the value is actually worth it, you can demand such like huge sums, but you should focus on like how much faster can you drive the value that the customer would get out of the project. Like basically they are paying you for the expertise that they don't have or that they would have to acquire. And out of that value you're providing, you can basically figure out like what would be an adequate fee. Just one specific example, how we do it at AISBACH. So first of all, we always do like our technical and data due diligence. So we are basically assessing the current system and how the technology would fit into that. And this is basically just to assess the complexity of the project. And we find basically integration requirements, we research potential solutions and define the scope. And through that, we determine the price together with the value we assume we could drive. The second step, if we decide to go for it, if we think the value hugely outweighs the cost, we do a quick proof of concept. And after the proof of concept, which is often really just a basic Streamlit version, which with a simple backend, we gather feedback from the end users and experts and analyze the behavior. And if we already see like they are using it right now because it's driving so much value, this is the sign that you actually need to continue to the full-scale solution. Otherwise, you really have to take a look back and why it isn't driving as much value or getting as much excitement from your users. And the last one basically is just full-scale solution development and integration, and that it fits into the full-scale solution. What we actually often like to do is actually provide like 1 week of extra for handover, where we just are available for questions and teaching the employees who are the end users of the tool to know how to work with it and how to figure it out. And for a consultancy especially, try to squeeze the last ounce out of operational efficiency. We like to build productized services. So we are trying more and more to build automatized GDPR compliance and AI Act analysis, more like a product than a service. So basically, we're taking the learnings we had in the consulting project and trying to productize it. We are building modules of code, which are basically things we can need from time to time, which are like pre-built components for RAG, for databases, but also infrastructure as code. So for example, Terraform, that we have code pieces which can spin up different architectures, and that everything is well documented, well maintained, and modularized, so that we can just plug it into future projects. Also charge for projects, not for hours, and try yourself to cut hours with AI. you can do so much nowadays, especially if you want to play around with something like agents. They often can produce like a good backend or a good enough front end for a POC completely automated or partially automated, where you only have to do some small adjustments over time. And also try to build systems and processes independent of you. So document everything, do looms, write guides, or create them with AI, so you can remove yourself more and more from the operational business. And I think where many people struggle, especially in the beginning of consulting, is the difference between users and customers. So users are who engage with the product. They are the people who are using whatever you're building. The customers is who buy it. And in the end, you always need buy-in from both. And this is basically what we are looking for when we have a champion and basically someone in the C-suite. Sometimes they're the same person, but most of them, they're separate ones. And you also need to understand them both. So users often speak of like capabilities and fear of replacement. The fear of replacement, especially with AI, is a huge one you will have to address. Customers really speak ROI and fear loss of reputation or financial. So they are thinking in terms of capital allocation, and you really need to demonstrate that it's actually viable. And just to close it out here, some ideas to basically get you started. For products or AI projects, at the moment, there is a lot of demand in data, especially clean data. And we also now have the technologies to actually aggregate it and get it. So basically LLMs, vision models, both require a lot of training data, but can also be used to clean and aggregate the data. And you can just start choose one task within an industry, find a customer. If you can't find one, do like a minimal version of the data set, like 100 rows, send it to him and try to get like a pre-sell or sell agreement set up. And then you can go back and basically get the full data set. Operational dashboards is something that most companies underestimate how much value it is delivering, especially in the C-suite. If they don't have a good operational dashboard on the key metrics of the company yet, this should be the first thing that should be built in most cases, under the assumption that some kind of data infrastructure already exists. And then traditional ML. I think at the moment, everyone is focusing on the fancy stuff, LLMs, foundational models. If you actually stick like more of the basics, you will have way less competition. So I love XGBoost. And I would at the moment love to have more projects where I'm allowed to implement it. And yeah, that's basically it. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot.
Well, let's thank Nicolay for an awesome presentation, packed with value. I got a lot of notes as well as questions. But yeah, let's open it up for Q&A. See, we got one from Peter in the chat. If you're providing something unique that the client couldn't do on their own, then may take longer to design a low-effort POC unless they are very tech illiterate, which of course a niche too. How do you reconcile that?
So this in the end is something that's a little bit solved if you go really niche, because if you are the subject matter expert in that area, or you are known for it, or you have experience in it, what is low effort for you and what is low effort for them are two separate things. And in low effort POC, this can mean many different things. So you can build a Streamlit dashboard with a subsection of the data, which you already have, just for test purposes. You can build simple chatbots with a simple UI. If you're going into really hardcore science projects, I think the low effort POC is something that is really hard to actually demonstrate and do, because you're rather selling your expertise in the subject area rather than the technical expertise. And I think if you're going for like science-based projects, you have to sell through that. And for that, I agree. You actually most often have to skip the POC.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks, Peter. We got another one from Vahid. When you talked about selling the idea first, were you talking about pitching the idea to people around you?
No, I'm actually trying to find actual customers. So I think with every idea, you have a target customer in mind, and you should be really specific of what that is. I'm mostly thinking in B2B. I have certain professions, certain companies, certain industries in mind, and I'm actually trying to get in contact with them and trying to sell them a tool. And especially people are very eager to talk, especially to startups, which is something we always go for. And we pitch ourselves as a startup. We are developing a startup idea, venture idea, where they would be interested. And they almost every time say yes. And then we basically try to get on a call, pitch to them, and set them on a wait list. And once we have enough people on a wait list with actual interest, we actually try to get like a POC, which is good enough, and try to sell it to them directly.
So we have a follow-up question. What are your suggestions on accelerating the process of creating a POC?
Use AI heavily. Let ChatGPT and Claude code as much as possible. I think also using like simplifying tools, which maybe cannot be used in a real production environment, but which ease the effort, which is something like Streamlit, and also try to build as many components as possible. So my co-founder is really good in Streamlit. So we already have like a large component library, which we are using over projects and over POCs. And we are always pulling it in. And building something like that in Streamlit is pretty easy because there are so many pre-built components already. If you're going for backend, on the backend side, I would try to abstract away as much as possible. So do not do any deployments of infrastructure you need to manage, but go with managed services. Try to not spin up any data infrastructure. So avoid databases, but rather mock the data or build on top of existing infrastructure. If you have to build like a mock database, which sits on the same server, which is attached, but also in that case, use something like Supabase, which is fast to set up, easy to use, and easy to integrate, and then just build a microservice wrap around that and build out your tool. So this is more about like choose the technologies which make your life easiest.
Another good question. Any other questions? Feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand. So I actually had one on the when you're talking about niching and you're listing all like those 5 different ways you can pick a niche. And I feel like this is a big struggle for a lot of freelancers, but I suppose for also startups, maybe they're trying to find the specific problem they're trying to solve, the specific customer they're trying to service. So how did that look like for you? You were talking about you guys reach out to private equity firms. Like, how did you guys land on your niche? What was the story?
So in the end, our niches are from our 3 backgrounds. So we have 3 co-founders, and I did freelancing only in the LLM space. So I started, I think, 2020 or something like that. And my 2 co-founders, one was mostly working in finance and one in biomedical. So we only chose that areas because we had good contacts in them. In the end, you can say that we go too broad of doing all of them. In the beginning, we mostly did LLM stuff. Now we are basically extending more and more into bio, pharma through the other co-founder and also doing the finance stuff.
So I also wanted to, as we wait for more questions, because I can just keep going, but I wanted to go back to when you're talking about selling before you sell. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of reach outs. So it's not like you're building a landing page and like trying to get a funnel of people, or do you guys do that as well?
We do it once we have enough validation.
Okay.
So I try to push as much development and effort back once we actually have validated the idea. Then we have validated the basically viability for the customer that we can actually sell it. And then I start to build stuff. But before that, I don't even want to touch any code or any websites. And
Okay.
the waitlist is rather like we are opening an Excel sheet or a Google Sheets and putting them in there.
Is there a certain number that you need to see? Like we need to see 20 signups, or we need to see like 10, like 5 sales or something like that? Or is it just depending on the use case?
It depends on the use case. I think you often also get a feel of it, of how excited the people are about the solution. This especially depends on how bad the existing solution is. And I shoot for it's different. For like really high value use cases, I'm often happy with like 5, but most often it's like 10 for me is like a guiding mark.
Okay, nice. So we got a question coming in from Stacy. Can you talk a little bit about what you're charging for POCs? How do you find the right price for buy-in?
Yeah, so for POCs, this also depends on what the company wants in the end. So on occasion, we get pushback from the company that they don't want a POC. They just want a full-scale solution, which is then something I advise strongly against, but in the end, we will implement it. The POC, we started out doing POCs from like around 7.5 to 12K. Nowadays, most of them are rather like 15 to 20. And pricing of what I like to look at is if they would sit down, an developer, an engineer they have in-house, how much time would it approximately take them to actually build it? And through that, you can approximate the cost. And if you charge a slightly lower price than that, they're happy because they just assume you can build it quicker. They don't have to spend one engineers off topics which are often like not the core business focus. So you're providing value in like terms of speed, in terms of it's cheaper, and also they don't have really the cost of time spent off the real business proposition or value proposition they are developing themselves.
So you were talking about with the POCs, sometimes you get pushback. And I feel like that may be pretty common because I feel the connotation of POC might be low value or something like that. And so companies may be hesitant to pay 20 grand for something like that. So how do you navigate that pushback? You know, you said that you will strongly advise against it. But what are some of the key points that you'll bring up?
So first of all, it's like paying for a POC that in the end either shows that it should be adopted or shows that it shouldn't be adopted and then can be integrated or built on top of for the full-scale solution is more valuable than or more sensible than building some full-scale solution and then figuring out that it's actually not really needed, not really desired by the users, or any other thing, or hard to integrate into their systems in the end. We can only advise on what we see happening in the AI space. I think if you believe all the statistics, around like 80% of data and AI projects fail. And I think it's partly because they don't get validated before. And if you kill the project like after 20K or after 10K of cost, and in place to like repeated POCs until you find one that really fits and that really works well, you often save money in the end because you're only developing one full-scale solution, which in the end provides value and is really used, as opposed to developing like one or two and then getting frustrated because neither one works.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's see, we got a few more minutes here. Any other questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat or just chime in.
I think Stacy's writing.
Okay. Coming in hot.
No pressure.
I'm surprised we're not hearing from Ben. He recently dove headfirst into the freelancing world, so I'm sure a lot of this is very relevant to him. Let's see. We got a comment. Sean and Nicolay are a great part of a small group of people who actually know what they're doing in the data and AI space.
Sorry, I had to chime in.
Yes, Let's see. All right. I guess while we wait, I'll throw another one at you. I guess when you're talking about like model as a service or like selling models, it feels like this is kind of like a new version of a data vendor, because that's
Yeah.
probably maybe one of the most successful business models in this space. I don't know, maybe looking at it from that perspective, do you see like data vendors like have an opportunity to leverage their data to make like these specialized models? Maybe looking to data vendors as like a guide of how you can structure a model as a service business?
So for one, yes, I think data vendors have the best opportunity to build on top of that stuff and also offer additional services. I think that would just make their offering more complete.
Mm.
But in the end, they will probably develop into like a SaaS solution for a specific use case for which the data is for. In the case of model as service, I think you have like two choices. Either you're also giving away the infrastructure and deploying it and charging for it and adding basically or charging the cost back to the customer. But for that, you really need to outperform on a performance basis. And I think, especially nowadays with like so many open source models, so much contribution, and also like the big closed source models, it will be hard to actually outperform by a large margin.
Yeah.
And you can only basically sell to companies who aren't as data and AI literate, because they will always try to build it in-house. And even if you get to sell to them, they will just try to aggregate the data and cut you out.
I guess, yeah, that's always the challenge. All right, let's see. We got one from Stacy. What are the limits of a POC? How do you draw the line at what is good enough to validate? Do you have any guidelines?
It depends whether it requires user interaction or not. For not being into user interaction, I think you can often build something pretty quickly within a week or two. For me, a POC, if it goes for more than 2 weeks with 2 developers, it isn't a POC anymore. In terms of scope of development of what it includes, I would say for something with a front end, a basic Streamlit front end, an API endpoint, and maybe a basic model which has good enough performance. And the basic models, in the case of, for example, when you're working with text data, I would use any closed source LLM. Or if you're working like more on a prediction use case, I would either try just a simple regression or an XGBoost model, because they spin up fairly quickly. If you're more in like data processing, I will probably build it with a combination of like regex plus LLMs and build it out that way, and then basically demonstrate value like that. But as I said, for me, like the guide is 2 weeks. I can be pushed 2.5 to 3 in special occasions, but I don't really like that.
All right, so we're right up on time. I just want to thank Nicolay again for the awesome presentation and then sharing all his tactical insights with us. And then thanks for everyone in the audience. So our next event is actually in person. So I don't know, unless there are people in the DFW area, may not be interested in that. But we have one, but next week we do have a huddle in the Discord. So that's just kind of a jam sesh where people get together and just share ideas, network, and share feedback with one another. So if you're interested in that, you can join the Discord. You'll get a link after this call. But with that, thank you guys again for joining, and we'll see you in the next one.